Hey everybody, it is Dean Z speaking to you from the University of Michigan Law School. I'm sitting here, I'm pretty smiley, I look like things are good. You didn't see what just happened where Dustin really giving me a hard time about things, bringing me down to earth. He told me I needed to start doing a little aura farming and so whatever. I'm going to try to keep my spirits up though. We got to be brave, right? Okay, today I want to talk to you about early decision. And I have notes, because again, Dustin yells at me when I forget things. So this should be a good episode. And I think it's a great timing because, we recently did one on when to send in your application. And I feel like this is a natural follow on from that topic. So let's get started, shall we? You want to apply to law school this year. You are ready on the early-ish side of things. The natural question is, should you apply early decision if you are in fact ready to apply? And there are pluses and there are minuses, and so I want to go through all of those. I want to start with defining our terms. Early decision, the way I am using it, means that you apply by a certain date, whatever the school says, and you are committing to attend if you are admitted, and then the school commits to get you an answer by a certain date. So at Michigan, if you apply by October 15th.
Hi everyone, it's Dustin. Quick correction here. The deadline is November 15th, not October 15th. Okay, back to Dean Z.
We promise we will get you an answer by December 15th, for example. And you, in turn, commit to attend if the answer that we give you is that you're admitted. That means you cannot apply to more than one school with a binding early decision, right? So if you've applied to Michigan binding early decision, you can't also apply to University of Michigan binding early decision. You can, however, apply to multiple law schools. So you can apply to one school, binding early decision, and then apply to all the other schools that you are interested in, just regular decision. If you are to get admitted, then the binding school will expect that you withdraw all those other applications, however. Early decision, importantly, is different from what is sometimes called early action, which is just if you apply early on in the process by a certain date, a school commits to get you an answer, but there is no other commitment there. You can attend or not attend. I know there are some schools, law schools, that have early action programs. I can't tell you off the top of my head which they are, but honestly, from my point of view, if they are not binding and you are ready to apply, I can't think of what the downside is to applying early action. So, if you're interested in a school that offers it and you're ready to go, you should, I think, certainly feel, like that's a good route for you. Other schools have a slight variation on early decision. I would actually think of it more as expedited decision. They call it early decision, but it's a little different because it doesn't require that you apply by a certain date. It basically is a process that rolls through the entire admission season, that if you apply and you commit that you will attend if you are admitted, they commit that they will get you an answer within a certain number of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks or something like that. So there are a number of schools that offer that kind of program. Much of what I say about early decision will also apply to those sorts of programs, but there's some also particular things to consider about them that I will get into as we go along. First thing that you should know when you're thinking about early decision in the law school context is that early decision is just not the thing in law school admissions that it is in many undergraduate schools. So we've all heard about these schools that if you don't apply early decision in undergrad, your chances of getting in have, absolutely evaporated or at least shrunk a lot. Law schools are not like that. So when I run the data for Michigan, I can tell you that over time, the percentage of our pool that applies early decision is between 1.8 and 2.2%, a minuscule part of our pool. Further, I can tell you that I do not admit more than 10% of the class via early decision, so 90% of our available seats are still available without regard to early decision. So there's still lots of opportunity there. So that means, good news, you shouldn't feel the pressure to apply binding early decision the way many people do in the undergrad realm, which I think is unhealthy if you're applying just because you feel like, I got to get in somewhere and this is the only way to do it. I don't think that's great. I think that's actually terrible. So I am glad that that is not how it works in the law school world. However, that fact notwithstanding, that there's less incentive, I will say that it varies a bit year to year because there are some years that are just more competitive in the law school world. So in many years, there's a high volume year, and then it's usually followed by a low volume year, and then a high volume year, and so on and so forth. So right now, last year was a very high volume year. There are signs suggesting that this coming year is going to be a high volume year too. Very hard to know, too early in the process to know for sure, but definitely a possibility. And in those circumstances, applicants feel a certain degree more competition to get into law school. And so it might be the case that even if you're not interested generally, you might be interested in applying early decision during a particularly high volume year. So I'm saying that in a high volume year, you might want to apply early decision because you're going to get a little boost from doing that. And that might be the thing you need to get into the school of your dreams. Why is there a boost at all? It's because you're exchanging something of value. The thing that you are giving the law school is your commitment to attend. And that's a big value for a school because we're trying to manage our enrollment, understand what our class size is going to be, hit certain targets. So knowing that someone has committed is valuable to the law school. And so correspondingly, there's a little bit of favoring that goes on there. The question is, to what degree do you get favored? Some law schools will say, oh, there's no difference. It's exactly the same. And I think the reason they say, that seems wrong to me, but I think what they mean when they say that is the people we admit early decision look, identical or at least very similar to the people we admit regular decision. And I think that's true. But what isn't being said is that in the regular decision pool, there are a lot of people who look like the people who get admitted who don't get admitted just because we get too many applications and we can't admit all the people we want. But in the early decision pool, which is much smaller and, just whatever, it's just much smaller, that means if I read you and I like you, I'm almost certainly going to be able to admit you. There's some people I don't admit, and we'll get to that in a minute, but even when I like them, but for the most part, a candidate who looks great in the early decision pool, who I admit, may or may not be a candidate who, if they were to apply regular decision, would have gotten in. Because it's just, there's so many more applications in the regular decision pool, and we don't have room for all of them. So that's where you get the little bit of a boost. To say that there's no boost, if that were really true, if it were exactly the same, why would you ever apply early decision? Sure, you get your answer a little bit earlier, and that is definitely worth something. It is great to know by mid-December, say, where you're going to go to law school. That takes a load off your mind. But that alone probably wouldn't make it worthwhile to apply. However, I do think that knowing that you have a slightly better chance, that might make it worth it for you. Or not, but it might. All right, so I just mentioned sometimes I like a candidate who's applied early decision, but I still don't admit them. Why would I do that? And it is because sometimes it is really important that someone knows what they're getting into, right? The last thing any school wants is to have someone they admit binding early decision to then have buyer's remorse and not want to come to your law school. So if I see someone who I think looks like a really good candidate, but I don't have any sense that they know much about Michigan, I might say, I'm not going to admit them binding early decision. Same with if someone talks a lot in a way that makes me think finances are a big issue for this person. Early decision might not be a great fit. And I will talk about finances more in a minute too. But what happens if there's someone who I like, but I don't want to admit them early decision? One of two things can happen if you apply early decision and you don't get admitted at Michigan. This is specific to Michigan, although a lot of schools have this system. Either I just might flat out deny someone. I might be sure I'm not going to be able to admit you in this year. Or I roll you into the regular decision pile and I keep considering you. Maybe I want more information. Maybe I want to see another semester of grades, or maybe there was some open question that we've contacted you about and we don't yet have an answer from you. In those circumstances, I'll roll you into regular decision, and I admit many people, well, not many, but a handful of people every year who get rolled into regular decision from early decision do get admitted down the road. Okay, so now let's talk about the financial decisions, which I just alluded to. Why is that a concern? Well, first of all, a school that has a binding early decision program may or may not treat the people they admit the same as people admitted during regular decision when it comes to financial aid. At Michigan, we make that commitment. We do treat you exactly the same. But some schools are very quiet about it. And I think you just have to presume you may be not getting the same treatment early decision because, again, they know you have already said you're committed to them. So they may think, I'm not going to give you any financial aid. I know you're coming one way or another. If a school that you are very interested in does not address how they treat financial aid for early decision, I would strongly recommend calling them and asking, how does this work? So that you can have a sense and at least be fully informed before you apply about what the outcomes are likely to be. There are also schools that say at the front end, if we admit you early decision, we promise that we will pay you X amount in merit aid. So then you have certainty. However, I will say the flip side of that is if they're guaranteeing financial aid, it means that you probably have less of a boost in the process because they're committing a lot of money to you. So they're not going to do that with the same reckless abandonment that I might have, right? Because, yeah, whatever. You get the point. But so, if you're interested in one of those schools, it's a little bit of a trade-off there. But even if a school like Michigan says, I promise that I will treat you just the same, whether you're admitted early decision or regular decision, and even for the people who get money committed to them before they've even applied, the downside is you cannot compare now schools, right? And some of us just like to have all that information in front of them when they're making a decision, and you are giving that up. So I would say look hard at yourself and know, are you the kind of person who can be comfortable without having all that information before you make a decision? Or is the uncertainty going to drive you batty? If so, early decision is not for you because there's just no way around it. You have to say yes before you get that information. And that is a nice segue to the other downside of applying early decision, which is, do you have enough information about the school? I know every year there are people who apply binding early decision to schools just because of that school's ranking. They think, I think this is the school with the highest ranking that I am most likely to be able to get into, so this is the school that I'm going to apply to. But they have not done their due diligence about that school. And then they get admitted, and then they learn more, and suddenly they're like, I don't love this place. Like, not all law schools are created identically, right? So even really great law schools may not appeal to all people. So you really got to do your due diligence before you make this decision to apply. How do you do that? Do it as if you've already been admitted, right? Talk to some alumni, visit the campus, read about the school, make sure that if you have a particular career goal that they ever send people into that geographic market or that type of work in which you have the goal, and so on and so forth. Act like you've already been admitted and look at the school as closely as that. When you're applying to school, it's a much less of just any regular application. It's much less of a commitment. You could apply to a whole bunch of schools, and it's money, but you're not giving anything away besides the money. Which, to be clear, I know is a lot of money. I just mean, like, other than money, there's nothing, you're not committing to anything. But early decision, you have to treat it as if you are choosing where to enroll, because effectively that is what you are doing. So take it seriously. What happens if you do apply, you haven't done the early decision, you did not take my advice, you apply early decision, you get admitted, you are bound, and then you realize, I'm not happy about this. Or maybe something in your life changes too. That can also happen. Like, there's an illness in your family, or you have fallen in love with someone in another part of the country, or whatever it is. Well, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to the school at that point and say, I'm having real regrets. I'm having second thoughts. I feel like most schools, it is, that they will be reasonable about letting you off the hook. I mean, remember, they can't force you to attend, so remember that. You still have freedom. If they are not pleasant about it, though, it might be that you can't attend law school in the year that you planned to attend. Like, maybe they will communicate with other schools and say this person broke their commitment to us, which is not a great thing. I'm not in any way minimizing that. That is not a great thing to do if you're a lawyer. I'm just saying sometimes things change. And make the commitment more of a problem. So if they're unpleasant about it, it might be that you have to put off law school for a year or two. I still think that is a better decision than going to a school you have become convinced you don't want to go to. Finally, I just want to talk briefly again about the schools I referred to earlier who have an expedited decision process, not a true early decision process. So these are schools that you can apply in February, binding early decision, and get a decision a couple weeks later. Why am I hostile to these plans? Because I think it really preys on the applicant's very understandable sense of anxiety about this process. You know, you've applied to 10 schools. It's mid-January. You haven't yet heard from any of them. You start thinking, what if they're all going to turn me down? What will I do? And you start to think, I just got to get in somewhere. And then you know you're too late for early decision, but you have this one school that has the expedited decision process, and you think, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to just do that. And you get admitted and you're bound. And you've done it out of a place of uncertainty and a little bit of panic. And the chances that this is going to be the right fit for you, I think, have really diminished under this set of circumstances. So I don't like it. I feel like it's sort of preying on the very natural anxiety that is part of this process. So just try and check yourself. If that's what you're inclined to do, make sure that it's really what you want and that you aren't just doing it reflexively or from degree of great risk aversion. That's just my advice. Be wary of doing that. In sum, the pros of applying early decision are you may get a little bit of a boost in the process, and you may find out much earlier than is typical where you're going to law school, making the next few months a lot easier on you. That's the pros. The cons are you are giving up a little bit of freedom of choice, both with regard to where you are going to school and with regard to financial aid. For the former, the solution is do your homework. For the latter, just really think about how are you paying for law school, and is this a good trade-off for you, and make sure you understand how that school treats financial aid. All right? I hope that's helpful. Let us know if you have follow-up questions. You know where to find us. Now, let's talk about grammar. Already talked about aura farming, so I did think about just changing the grammar section to being just like my favorite slang terms of the week, but I think that makes me sound like an idiot, so I decided not to do that. But we were talking about farming, so let's talk about what I think is a very common misunderstanding of a phrase. The phrase is deep-seated. Many people think it is deep-seated. Maybe you can't even hear the difference between what I am saying. Deep-seated is like the word seat, like your butt, right? Like you are in a deep chair that you can't get out of. And deep-seated is like a seed that you have planted very deep. They sound like, the meaning sounds very similar, and that's where the confusion comes from. Because what it means is just something that it is, a very strongly held view, right? It's a bias that's deep-seated. It's one you don't get over very easily. So you can make a case why either makes sense. But Dustin pointed out, like, a deep seat is one, again, you can't get out of. And that is what you should be thinking of mentally when you're using this phrase. Think of a squishy beanbag chair. You're never getting out of that, right? We're deep-seated, don't say that. If you say it orally, I think no one will ever catch you or be able to prove that you got it wrong. But of course, if you write it, they'll know that you don't know what you're talking about. So just remember Dustin in a beanbag chair and say deep-seated. All right? That's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this. Please keep sending us questions. I'm compiling a good list. I'm going to get some out of the way in a future episode. Send us emails to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu and put vlog in the subject line, or put them in the comments. We love to see them. Thanks as always to Dustin. I appreciate how you keep me humble. And wherever you go, go blue.